This is a 10-minute summary of the book The Blazing World by Margaret Cavendish, published in 1666. It's possibly the earliest science fiction novel. Margaret Cavendish was the Duchess of Newcastle, and she was also a philosopher and very prolific author. The Blazing World is a rich philosophical novel, and I have made illustrations for it. Here you can see my process. These are digital drawings made on an iPad. As you will see, the book is a kind of thought experiment that looks at the limits and possibilities of science, which was just then starting off, and also what role science can play in government. So, let's dive right into it. A merchant in a foreign country had fallen in love with a beautiful lady, but he is below her in both wealth and station, and has no hope of marrying her. So he stalks her and decides to kidnap her. At some point, she is collecting shells on the beach, and he just takes her and puts her on his boat. Unfortunately, his packet boat is caught up in a huge storm. The boat is driven off course all the way to the North Pole, and there the boat passes on to another world, where skillful astronomers have often observed 2 or 3 suns at once. All men in the boat die. The boat lands in an icy country, and the lady, as the sole survivor, is rescued by bear-like creatures. They look like polar bears, but they walk upright and they are dressed. They speak a language she cannot understand. She's scared, but they treat her with civility and kindness, and they bring her to their city in the underground caves, where they feed her with food that she can eat. The bear men decide to take her to the emperor of their country. So she takes a long voyage, seeing a lot of the country, as well as several naval inventions, such as an engine to blow wind to beat off the waves, and several ships joining together as one. Then she perceived a cliff, which was part of those rocks, out of which she spied coming forth a great number of boats, which afar off showed like a company of ants marching after one another. At last, our nameless lady reaches the imperial city called Paradise. The buildings are low, like Roman architecture, and rivers did run betwixt every street, which, together with the bridges, whereof there was a great number, were all paved. The emperor instantly falls in love with the lady, who has meanwhile learned the language, and he made her his wife, and gave her an absolute power to rule and govern all that world as she pleased. The people in this world have all sorts of skin colors, but none resemble those of earth. Cavendish, who loved fashion, then goes into great detail describing the accoutrements of the empress. The description is like a Disney princess version of Hobbes's Leviathan, and she does have a rainbow-shaped and colored buckler. Now, before she becomes empress of all that world, called the Blazing World because of all the blazing stars, namely comets, she does something very sensible, and that is to gain advice from various experts, including in the sciences. First, she talks to her politicians, who are foxmen, asking them why they have so few laws and monarchy. The foxmen reply that many laws make many divisions, which most commonly did breed factions, and at last break out into open wars. She asks some questions to the religious leaders, and then she goes on to ask the birdmen about astronomy and meteorology. There are lots of contemporary interesting discussions on, for example, how snow is made. They had no idea in the 17th century, and what air consists of. She then commands her experimental philosophers, bearmen, to go to the North Pole and observe astronomical phenomena through telescopes. Unfortunately, the bears begin to bicker about what they see. She then orders them to break their telescopes. The bearmen, being exceedingly troubled at Her Majesty's displeasure concerning their telescopes, kneeled down, and in the humblest manner petitioned that they might not be broken, for, said they, we take more delight in artificial delusions than in natural truths. The bearmen are allowed to keep their telescopes, on the condition that their quarrels don't negatively impact the government. Then they gaze through microscopes, and they see insects, charcoal, and other objects through them. But again, they disagree on what they're seeing. The empress is skeptical, but the bears reply, she did not know the virtue of those microscopes, for they never delude, but rectify and inform the senses. Nay, the world, said they, would but be blind without them, as it had been in former ages, before those microscopes were invented. More extensive discourses follow. For example, of the fishman, she asks why the sea is salt, and whether creatures such as lobsters have blood. The lengthy replies again give us a fascinating look into 17th century scientific debates, and of Cavendish's knowledge and engagement with them. She talks to the worm man and ape man about what we would now call earth science and chemistry, about how ebb and flow come about, and whether minerals and all other creatures within the earth were colorless, or if color is an inherent property of objects. The chemists are ape men. Note that alchemists and early chemists were called apes of nature. She asks them about basic elements, and she gets alchemical replies, for example, that salt, sulfur, and mercury are basic elements. Cavendish is a fan of the new science and not of the old schoolmen. The logicians are magpie, parrot, and jackdaw man, an allusion to the attire of university dons or schoolmen at the time. But the empress has no patience for their rhetorical tricks, which she calls chopped logic, which disorders my reason and puts my brain on the rack. Having concluded her conferences with experts, the empress then goes on to social engineering. First, she notes that the manner of their religion is very defective, that so wise and knowing a people should have no more knowledge of divine truth. So she founds an order of sisters, and then places 2 chapels on top of each other, one chapel to instill comfort, the other to instill a fear of hellfire with special effects. For fear, though it makes people obey, yet does not last so long, she says, nor is it so sure a means to keep them to their duties as love. Next, the empress uses hermetic magic to commune with spirits and to write her own Kabbalah. Now at the time magic wasn't clearly separated from science, and the Kabbalah, which Christians had appropriated from Jews, was wildly popular. So the empress asked the spirit whether there was a 3-fold Kabbalah, and they argued that Dee and Kali, 2 magicians, made but a 2-fold Kabbalah, to wit of the Old and New Testament. But others might not only make 2 or 3, but 60 Kabbahs, if they so pleased. But who can be the scribe for the Kabbalah? The empress first considers a bunch of ancient philosophers and then some contemporary authors such as Descartes, Helmont, and Hobbes, but none of them want to do it. However, a certain humble lady, a duchess in Newcastle, is willing. So here you have a total self-insert. Cavendish writes herself into the story, and she and the empress get so well along that they became platonic lovers, although they were both females. Then both women visit the Duke of Newcastle, Cavendish's husband, and they become a platonic threesome. The conversation of these 3 souls was so pleasant that it cannot be expressed, for the Duke's soul entertained the Empress's soul with scenes, songs, music, witty discourses, and pleasant recreations. The Empress hears from the spirits, through the use of hermetic magic, that her own country is in trouble and being invaded. The emperor gives her permission to use the advanced technology of the blazing world to assist her country. That technology includes submarines. To make such ships that could swim underwater, and when the ships were made ready, the Duchess told the empress that it was requisite that her majesty should go herself in body as well as in soul. Not only does she force the enemies to surrender, she then goes, oh dear, lots of British Empire vibes, to conquer the nearby countries for her native country, using the superior technology such as firestones and telescopes from the blazing world. Thus, the Empress did not only save her native country, Cavendish writes, but made it the absolute monarchy of all that world, and both the effects of her power and her beauty did kindle a great desire in all the great princes to see her, but she still returned to her blazing world and to her friend. The emperor is overjoyed to see her safely returned. She continues to rule, and sometimes the empress goes abroad by water in barges, sometimes by land in chariot, and sometimes on horseback.